Hello everybody and welcome to the Healthtech Pigeon podcast, bringing you the top health tech news stories and analysis every week. I'm Belle Taylor and today I'm joined by two brilliant guests from SomX. We've got Hugh Penson and our extra special guest today is Steve Roest, CEO and founder of PocDoc. Great to see you, Steve. I think last time I saw you, you were wearing a sparkly jacket and singing Frank Sinatra. So a far cry from this week.
I feel slightly
underdressed.
I don't go to the same events as you two, clearly.
Yeah, that was a special one. You've got to get out to Malta for MedTech World. We all remember MedTech World 2023 fondly.
It was the one.
Yeah.
It was the one. How's your week going so far?
It's good. Yeah, it's really good. So I spent yesterday in the House of Lords, House of Commons, and then I was on stage at a event hosted by Paddington Life Sciences and Imperial College, which was really interesting, sitting next to Dame Caroline Clark on a panel around the NHS, the future, the 10-year plan. Obviously, we were completely thrilled to be and honoured to be able to contribute to the plan and to feature in the plan and sort of really actually it's less about PocDoc and more about the amazing work that our NHS partners have done. So it was really cool actually being in the Lords and being in the Commons and speaking to people was actually it felt like there was a lot of positivity, you know, and I genuinely, as you know, I'm quite a good news bear anyway. My baseline is quite high, but it was really nice to feel like people were coalescing around this, like, right, let's give this a crack. Let's try some things. Let's feel a bit more positive. It's not to say that there's blinkers on and we're ignoring everything, but actually there seems to be a lot of people that just really want to believe and really want to hope. And that's really quite nice.
Amazing. Oh, that sounds really cool. And obviously last week was a huge week for UK health tech and life sciences with the publication of the 10-year report, or 10-year plan rather. So hopefully this week's news stories will live up to that.
Yeah, who knows? I mean, yeah, let's see. I'll do that. We can do it. We can only do our best, can't we?
Anyway, all right, let's jump into this week's news. So, from Healthtech World, a tech-led NHS could boost the UK economy by £40 billion, a report finds. So for our first story, we look at the massive economic and health potential of a tech-driven NHS. A new report co-authored by the Boston Consulting Group, Siemens Healthineers, which is quite a tongue twister, and Imperial College London suggests that embracing advanced technologies like AI and remote monitoring could add £40 billion to the UK economy annually. Commissioned as part of the NHS 10-year plan, the report outlines how earlier diagnosis and more personalised preventative and more personalised preventative care could not only improve patient outcomes, but also increase healthy life expectancy, particularly for the UK's most deprived communities. Some of the most striking predictions include generating 12 to 18 billion in productivity gains for NHS systems, halving drug development timelines, and potentially delivering 2 to 3 million additional healthy life years for economically disadvantaged groups. This follows the spending review, which included 29 billion funding boost for the NHS. So now seems to be the moment to shift from these sorts of pie-in-the-sky thinking to actually large-scale implementation. And Steve, actually, I'm sure the talks you've been at this week are probably quite illuminating when it comes to this as well. So I'd love both of your thoughts on this report. And in particular, what do you see as sort of the most realistic near-term opportunities for AI and digital technologies to deliver these tangible benefits to the UK?
Who goes first? Do you want to?
Steve, as our guest of honour, you can go first.
Okay. Obviously, all reports like this that have conclusions like that are welcomed, I think is fair to say, by anyone in the space, even in the broadest sense. Okay, anything that's positive and uplifting and underlines the benefit of adopting and scaling new technologies, whether it be, you know, what PocDoc does in digitized, personalized, preventative stuff, or AI, you know, ambient scribes, or, you know, AI supported drug discovery, all that good stuff. It's all absolutely wonderful. You know, is it 40 billion? Is it 10 billion? Is it 25 billion? I mean, I don't really know. What is obvious though, I mean, even every single company in the space, in any of those spaces, like PocDoc being one, is we all have NHS validated, NHS co-authored health economic studies clinical data, real world data, that is exactly what this report says, where you can, by adopting these technologies at scale, save huge amounts of ill health, save huge amounts of lives, save huge amounts of money, and by doing so generate massive amounts of incremental revenue for the exchequer, additional jobs, additional GDP, and so on. It's sort of self-evident. I think that the thing that, so that's the upside case, in effect. And that's a lot of what was being discussed yesterday in the Lords and Time of the Commons and things like that, and then the kind of crew in the evening, which was great. I think the kind of like caveat on it is really that that's easy to say, and it's easy to build models that show that, right? It's sort of like Excel maths in a way. It's like, more people in top equals benefit down here. Actually, the real challenge is how you can, and this is what Caroline and I were talking about yesterday, and I look forward to working with her more on it, is how can the system, government system, that continuum, actually support people from not just doing phase ones, but phase twos and phase threes and so on. So as in, the system itself is actually pretty good at doing pilots or phase ones. I call them phase ones. I don't like the word pilot. It sounds too little. So phase ones. The system's actually pretty good at that. I don't see any data, but like anecdotally, pretty much everyone that I encounter doesn't really have an issue getting pilots done, phase ones done. Where it does struggle is in the bit that would actually unlock what was in that report. To actually unlock what's in that report, you need people to be screening or screening or working with or scaling through hundreds of thousands of patients every year. That is really where the challenge is, because unless the system can support businesses to scale that way, those businesses will not be able to hire teams, will not be able to grow, and so on. And so it will sort of remain this pot at the end of the rainbow, hypothetically real, but sort of impossible to capture. I've merged analogies there, actually, because it's a unicorn that's impossible to capture. But you see what I'm trying to say there. But that's my view on it. I mean, look, welcome, bring it. Great, good news. How and Caroline was talking about how, for example, Northwest London, North London is going to be one of the innovation zones that was mentioned in the 10-year plan. Wonderful. Innovation zones, whoop-de-doo, like sign me up. That's absolutely epic. I said to her, my advice, she did ask, it wasn't unprompted. My advice was like, don't focus on just having more innovation pilots. We don't need that. Why don't you commit in your region, in that zone, to say our job is to take the companies we select to 100,000 patients? Because if you get something to 100,000 patients, that's the real deal at that point. Phase ones.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's a really big question. So I guess my sort of approach to it would be that, so my background prior to being a co-founder of PocDoc is really VC-backed technology and really hyper growth scaling within B2B plays or B2B2C plays. And so I have always approached the healthcare system as a B2B enterprise issue. One of the things that underpins any B2B enterprise process is accurate transparent discovery, right? So being able to communicate openly with a customer about their needs, about their budget, about their timeline, about their challenges, and sort of work collaboratively around a potential solution. Now, the issue as I see it, apart from everything that you just said, which is this like really broad continuum, and I completely agree with you, is that I actually don't believe the issue is in how can you help people generate more evidence. Like pretty much everyone that does a phase one has evidence to even get the phase one, pretty much. And the phase one pretty much generates positive evidence, right? The people running these businesses are qualified, sensible, smart. They're funded often by major grant institutions. They're backed by academia. These aren't sort of, you know, I don't know, 21-year-olds that just decide and go and start a company. You know, these are real people dealing with real serious clinical issues in many cases and quite complex technology and oftentimes. So I don't believe it's an evidence generation gap, actually. I think it's more of a procurement gap, if anything, which is it's extremely difficult to find anybody, to go back to my example around transparent discovery, at a system level, a commissioning, because the difference between a phase one, which comes out of an in-year budget in the NHS, and phase two, which is multi-year, which is crossing over multiple budget years, means you sort of end up going towards a commissioning pathway. It's very difficult to understand or even figure out how to have those conversations with people. So if you can't have an accurate discovery process, it becomes there's a danger it becomes a bit of a lottery. So I think of all the things that they could be doing, I think sometimes there's a tendency to try and improve things that are probably okay at the expense of really putting some major thought capital into stuff that's really hard. So, you know, you could definitely have more people thinking about how to improve evidence generation, and you could have, you know, and well, that's partly what the health innovation networks do. Right? That's kind of part of their role, and there are other people that do that. Maybe NICE is going to take more of a role. Maybe MHRA is going to, whatever. Like that's going to happen. Innovation passports and compasses and all those kinds of other things, which is all well intentioned and is all like rising tide raises all ships. Like it's all positive. Doesn't change the underlying issue, which is okay, so you're going to get more people into phase ones. Cool. They're going to generate better quality data that shows their intervention, product, service is effective. Okay. And then what? Then where does this go? Because a lot of these things are novel or reasonably novel. So then a lot of the systems aren't necessarily commissioning these things in the course of business. So if I have a concern, it's about a real, genuine, grown-up conversation around that phase one, phase two transition. And I haven't, and maybe it is happening. I really hope it is. I've not necessarily heard it so much. Where I have come across it, so I'm very honoured to sit on the NHS England SME Advisory Board. And that covers all SMEs that sell into the NHS. So one of the guys on it, he absolutely crushes milk procurement. He's like the largest independent supplier of milk in the Southwest. Like he ships like 5,000 litres to every NHS trust in the Southwest every week, right? Like he powers Costa, in effect, you know, from like down to Taunton or wherever it is, you know, end of the, you know, John O'Groats, Land's End, right? So, and where I think so-called tagged innovation businesses, we need to understand and learn from other businesses that are really exceeding in procurement, right? And really try and learn how we can do that better to try and escape this sort of phase one thing. So we should be, I would love the system. And, you know, that the NHS Innovation Accelerator does a bit of this, and we're trying to do a bit of it with the SME board. We need to be trying to bring some of these worlds together. Because the NHS spends 127 billion pounds a year. It probably, if someone did the maths, it's probably the single largest acquirer of medical technology and medical supplies in the world as a single organization. So it's not that it doesn't spend money. It's not that it doesn't procure things. It's just that how can you, it's a question of allocation, really. And learning how to get innovative things allocated and, you know, existing things deallocated. So I'd love to, if I had a magic wand, it would be that there's some drive and impetus around that piece of it.
So was there enough? I've got to drag us back to 10-year plan because
Sure.
I mean, to tell you the truth, for this report, it took me a while to actually find the report when I looked, and I think that's
Yeah.
down
Well,
to someone who's potentially tried to drop a really interesting report around the same time as a 10-year plan, and it said essentially the same thing.
but it was.
So
Did you say it was funded by the government, Belle? Is that what
this
you
this
said? This report was.
this specific report
Yeah.
is Imperial, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it said it was commissioned by the NHS as part of the 10-year plan, but authored
Okay.
by Imperial, Siemens, and Boston Consulting Group.
Yeah, it's very interesting, and like the kind of core bits of it are these like 4 visions and 4 scenarios where they look at how tech can play a role. And for a report that is commissioned by the NHS and delivered by Siemens, there is an awful lot about where Siemens fits in, which I think is a nice and really
look,
really shocking. But
it's not surprising. There is a quid pro quo on these things, as we know, with these reports sometimes. Is it right? Probably not. Is it allowed? Yeah. It's just it's one of those things. I don't know. I mean, I don't quite know how biased it is towards Siemens, but I'm not shocked that the
they're
co-sponsor
mentioned
gets
in
mentioned.
a lot of the scenarios. But it's not a criticism. It is just that this is what happened.
It
right?
is what it is, yeah.
Like, and they do make really valuable technology. I guess. But I mean, by virtue of that, though, we have to pull it back to the 10-year plan. And that opens up that question, which is: was there enough in that report on that procurement piece, on that like how do you actually
There was nothing in there.
buy this technology?
Because it's so the 10-year plan was, I read it as a ambitious, forward focused, positive, call, sort of a halcyon call, if you say, sort of like a rallying call for the future sort of thing, starting today but sort of accelerating. It obviously lacks any kind of delivery component whatsoever. That's fine, because that's not what it was. Let's see where that bit comes in. I don't know. Sometimes I feel like I'm a little bit of a lone voice. I mean, I know I'm not a lone voice around this procurement piece, but I don't quite know whether people feel like it's. I don't know. It's really easy to feel happy because more innovations are being used, right? That gives everyone joy feelings, right? That isn't the same as innovation having a bigger impact at scale. It's not the same thing. So I think it depends a little bit, and we'll have to see how it goes around which way the wind ultimately is going to blow on these things. And there's also like some really prosaic stuff in there around actually just doing things that are supposed to be done, just doing them a bit better. Like neighborhoods isn't necessarily innovative technology, although technology might be used to deliver the care there. So it isn't just a tech plan. I do think there's a huge amount of like workforce and deployment and operational stuff in there as well that's going to change.
Nice. One of the things I wanted to ask you about, Steve, was relating to something you said early on in your answer, which is that this conversation you had yesterday, and you were talking to someone saying one of the ways that we can make this shift happen from phase 1 to phase 2 is by unlocking budget in your local region, for example, supporting that. How do we ensure that for all the well-intentioned people that take that advice and run with it, they unlock that pot in their region? How do we then ensure that we see impact on a national scale? How do you envisage that happening?
I mean, I'm not a commissioner, and I think that they are regionally or nationally, I think they have a really difficult job, and probably are a bit unsung, if that makes sense, and probably don't get the credit that they deserve in dealing with these issues. So I can see this from both sides. Okay, so if you were to take a purely B2B focused approach to this, the idea that there's 42 customers, i.e., the ICBs are going to get broken up, but like last week there was 42. Who knows what's going to be next week? But and within each one, there's a variety of different inroads and a variety of different, clinical champions and economic champions and operational champions and things like that you might have to do. On the paper, that's not actually that intimidating, right? As a challenge to solve. So that's on the one side. Obviously, it is massively frustrating when something succeeds in one region and then it isn't taken to another region. And I completely agree, like some kind of pathway to say, well, if it's worked here, you don't have to repeat things over there. What I do, and I said this yesterday, I do think it's completely dumb if you have to do basic DD, due diligence, again, in different areas. That's really silly. But I don't believe it's technically silly to ask people to do a phase 1 in a new place. As in, if you've done phase 1 or phase 2 in one region and then you go to another region, I don't think on the face of it it's bad that they say, okay, cool, we'll start with a phase 1 and then we'll go from there. I don't, that if you were working in any other sector, you'd be fine with that, so as long as you're getting paid and you're not losing money on it, theoretically, and it's not painful to get there. I think that's the issue with a lot of the processes, particularly with innovative products, because there isn't a natural procurement pathway sometimes, or an obvious procurement pathway. It feels really attritional. I think there's also been examples where in some cases that I've read publicly where the NHS hasn't been a good customer for SMEs, and that is a different issue. And I do think that there should always be the Procurement Act is going to help with this, and the SME Advisory Board is a big thing for us, is how the NHS can be the best customer for SMEs, whether they're innovative or whether they sell milk, not that the milk person isn't innovative, sorry about that, but you know what I mean. So and how does it play up nationally? That's really hard, because there's one national team, really. Well, there were two, Department of Health and National and NHS England. Now they're going to be the same thing. So it's a very, very real possibility that many things that work and are working regionally will not make the cut for a national program. It's just a bandwidth issue, right? So there may be many things that work really well that remain regional, and I don't know necessarily that that's a bad thing, like on the face of it, just because not everything could be national. It would be great, so don't get me wrong, but that's sort of how I try and get my head around it. I also think that if it isn't working regionally, then I think a national conversation is really hard.
Definitely, yeah.
Right? So sort of like there's two sides to that, which is, it's not always the system's fault, right? So, but I do believe it's completely frustrating to have to completely go back and repeat steps, or do like, for example, back in the day with the health innovation networks, where you would speak to one and fill out this massive form, and then you would speak to another and fill out the same form, but with slightly different questions in order, like things like that. It's really frustrating.
I guess one of the dangers as well of, you've just said, and I think, and you're right, that it's not necessarily a bad thing if these things end up in pots regionally and don't end up being rolled out nationally. But I guess there is a danger that we end up sort of perpetuating inequalities and lack of access to these things, because they're going towards places that have more funds to fund these projects, have maybe better things in place.
Maybe. I mean, it depends. It's hard to say hypothetically, because we're sort of hypothesizing about what the product or service might be and hypothesizing about the area. So, I suspect that regions will continue, or this is what I think should happen. Regionally, spend should be focused on what they believe the priorities are for that region.
Yeah.
Kind of. And I think that pathway to devolution is sort of happening. I'm not quite sure exactly where it is, but I think there'll be a bit more of that from what I can tell. Now, that the issue with that means, though, that there might be more deviation region to region around what a priority is, right? So that could exacerbate this postcode lottery. But I don't know because I can't see that data at that level, as however frustrating that will be for innovators, including PocDoc. Right, we're in it together. We're all in it. I don't know whether that's like, because they might want to be solved. One region might be trying to solve the problem in a different way, right? And that might be okay. It's just because they don't want to use a piece of technology to do it, or your piece of technology. I don't know. I think sometimes I feel like this is the type of debate that we should be having, and not necessarily the sort of like beat the system up with a stick because it doesn't adopt innovation fast enough thing. It should be sort of like, how do we address postcode lottery risk
Mhm.
while also helping you address priorities, sort of thing, which is much more
Yeah.
nuanced.
Yeah,
Much more
agreed.
nuanced.
But much more valuable.
Yeah, much more valuable. This is where I think the debate has to evolve to,
Mm.
because even now, this week after the 10-year plan last week, I've encountered NHS and system people who are still sort of almost like apologizing about how the system works, and it's sort of like, well, at some point, how do we move past this to just
Yeah.
draw a line under it and work towards a better sort of future and sort of help each other, and as opposed to saying, oh yeah, we're really sorry, we know it's really slow, it's like, I don't know. That was slightly
Yeah.
ranty, so sorry about that.
Well, no, I think it's good, and well, hopefully, as you said, this 10-year plan is that rallying cry to hopefully look ahead and get people sort of thinking about how we can implement these things over the next 10 years and see that tangible impact.
Yeah, I think it's, I mean, a huge thing that obviously isn't in the plan, which I think is that a willingness to take considered risks
Yeah.
is a big thing, which is a huge culture shift.
Yeah, and very much from the B2B side, that's what successful businesses take a punt.
Yeah, that's gonna be really difficult, right? Because and that could get quite stressful for people, because you sort of have a plan that's massively geared around adoption of really new, exciting technologies. That's not really the same as a cultural shift on a local level about why it's okay to make changes to clinical pathways and things like that. I do think that second bit shouldn't be overlooked, because that does impact scale and speed of adoption. And I think it's a bit of an oversimplification to expect human individuals to just magically shift their mindset about things overnight because there's a visionary document.
And we know system change is
And it's
difficult.
super hard. And people often, I think, say they use system change when actually they mean like human change or culture
Yeah.
change. Like, as
Yeah.
if it's this sort of like third party thing that we can upload some new software and off we go. Oh, I've just installed my updates. It's like, no,
Yeah.
you're talking about real people who've been doing
Yeah.
really hard, difficult jobs for a really long time in a particular way. And then you're saying they have to make a change. So that's not a simple transition.
No, we talk about this a lot, actually. Like, it's the fact that people within the NHS, they're busy, they're working with legacy technology, they've got so much on their plate that they need to be told up front that putting the effort in to overcome this barrier will be worth it. They need to really know that's going to be the case, because they don't want to put the time in to train themselves on a new system, to use something else, to change their pathways, if it's going to make things more complex or complicated. And when you don't have all the time in the world to be like, oh, I'm just going to like set that up and see how it goes, everything's pressured.
Yeah, and also know that your organization, whatever that is, has got your back. That if
Absolutely.
you're going to back a change or support a change or deliver a change, and maybe it's not going to work 100% of the time. And obviously, we hope that it doesn't impact patient health, obviously, but it's not going to work 100% of the time. So are they supported and protected in that institution? If they're not, then it's very difficult. It's going to be really difficult to get them to put heads above parapets on some of this stuff.
So, Samsung is set to acquire US health tech firm Xealth, which I'm assuming is how you pronounce it, in a major digital health push. So, this is a significant move in kind of global digital health, I guess, from Samsung. So, they've announced plans to acquire a US-based company called Xealth, which is a healthcare platform spun out of Providence Health System in 2017. Xealth allows hospitals to manage digital health tools, including remote monitoring and digital prescriptions, and is already in use by more than 500 US hospitals. So Samsung's ambition is to sort of create these synergies between its wearables, its watches, its rings, all its technology that consumers use, and sort of link that up with Xealth's hospital-focused platforms, building this sort of connected and personalized care ecosystem. And it also signals sort of this move into digital health, which we've seen historically other big tech giants, Apple, Google, go into digital health and take steps back as well. So it's kind of interesting to see that Samsung are doing this. So I thought a nice sort of consumer-focused story off the back of the tech-led report that we just talked about. So I'd love to throw it over to you first of all and ask the two of you, what do you think are the potential benefits and risks of integrating consumer wearable data into hospital systems? Hopefully lots.
Okay, one, I don't believe hospitals are going to look at any wearable data that doesn't have some clinical impact. Okay, so I'm not a wearables expert, so I'm not sure what that is, but the for them to care about, and I guess we're talking about remote monitoring, virtual ward, hospital at home sort of concept. For them to care about any of that, it has to be a medical device or very close to a medical device, and it has to be feeding into a clinical pathway about that patient. And there's tons of companies in the UK that do various bits and bobs around this. There's one in the US called Current Health that was funded by MMC Ventures, as is PocDoc, that sold to Best Buy a few years ago for $400 million. And I suspect, if I had to take a punt, this is a similar thing, which is Samsung has some thesis internally around being able to acquire or adapt or improve its wearables or buy in new wearables that might then allow it to expand into remote monitoring, virtual wards sort of concept. And this, is it Xealth or Xealth or Xealth, is the conduit. So it's got the middleware, if you like, that can connect said group of devices, some of which maybe exist, some of which don't, into a set of customers, these 500 hospitals. And it's sort of, that's the sort of play here. But yeah, I mean, I don't quite know what the wearables are that virtual wards use necessarily. But yeah, I mean, anything that helps deliver care remotely, I think is remotely but safely, is great. I'm a huge fan of remote care and remote monitoring and remote screening. I think it's a great way to go. It's way more convenient for the patient, way easier for them sometimes, and it reduces strain and cost at in the hospital or the primary care site. So cool. Do I think that Samsung will suddenly become a leader in, virtual wards and home health? Maybe not, but that's where I am on it, really.
That's an interesting nod to the nod to Current Health there. I thought that was very interesting, given that they just bought it back from Best Buy. So clearly something didn't quite go to plan there.
Well, so I can't disclose or divulge anything, but I think that obviously maybe a mobile phone retailer wasn't like the ideal home for a remote diagnostics business, perchance. But I think the idea that but from what I can tell, the business grew, right? It was going really well. The business itself is in really, really good shape. So, and I spoke to the founder there a few days ago, and he's super bullish about the whole thing. So good luck to them. What I find weird, actually, is that we don't really talk about Current Health as a success story in the UK. You know what I mean? In the ecosystem. I'm not even sure if many people remember it, if that makes sense. So I don't come across it being mentioned even by remote diagnostics providers that startups, right? If I was a startup in remote diagnostics, remote monitoring, virtual wards, I'd be using big giant neon arrows, being like, I'm like those guys. They got bought for $400 million in cash by Best Buy, I feel like we should be pumping their tires up a bit as a real success story. And the point I'm saying is that I do think the UK health tech industry needs some really clear wins and success stories that we can point to. And that's a really clear one. They went from the UK to the US. They're a UK-based business. They're based in Edinburgh. They're a homegrown, high-tech, R&D-based clinical services business that's done super well. And I don't think they get enough airtime.
Put two and two together.
Huh?
I never put two and two together on the UK and the US business.
Right, they took the UK. They took a UK business in remote monitoring to the US and launched in the US. They got FDA. They did all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Right, that's amazing. How many UK health tech businesses do that successfully? It's not that many.
No.
So I feel like that's a slight tangent, sorry, but I feel like that they don't get, and we don't talk about enough about them as a success story, and I feel like we should.
It's also absolutely crazy, like the conversation we have, and just broadly about wearables. And I think there's a lot of like superficial kind of perception of wearables. And I think, Steve, you mentioned that like you don't know what the wearables going on in like UK clinical trials are and that kind of thing. And I don't think many of us could name companies that don't. Like it was one story in the last 6 months has been about an actual clinical wearable being used in clinical trials, and that is the
Yeah,
only reason I can name a brand that makes them. And I
yeah,
think I'd probably get it wrong if I tried.
yeah.
If we pull it back to like, I mean, I'm dragging us, kicking and screaming back
That's
to the
right.
previous story on this one,
Sure.
because like of those four scenarios, like one of them is looking at, well, I think like three of them look at wearables and the role that wearables play in just people. Like, I think there's both a child and an elderly person with a wearable, and it's so carefully put together in the way they phrase these scenarios, because they say an Apple Watch or a Fitbit gives a little nudge, and then very neatly underneath you can see someone's changed it to be like for lifestyle metrics that are just
Yeah.
for
Right.
information, and definitely don't fit. But that's sort of how it fits into that preventative care approach, and that is fine. Like these things are valuable; they do give great nudges, but as you say, they're never going to be used in, well, never.
Yeah.
We can't talk
Never's a
longer
long
term,
time,
but
but
never say
yeah,
never, etc. But they're so far away from this point, and I think it is very interesting to see Samsung coming in and going, we got our big consumer wearables space. What can we do with the combo? I, tried to stay positive because I think you had that thing on positive mindset earlier,
yeah.
Steve. But it does feel like it's got to be something else they're looking at. It maybe can they stretch into that kind of wearables for
Maybe.
clinical data? Is there something that they can build or provide?
I mean, these guys are also like gigantic businesses that buy all kinds
Yeah,
of businesses. In that
Mhm.
press release, there was a list of businesses they bought recently, and it's just all over the park. I mean, they're buying all kinds of different things. So it might well be for what the price that this undisclosed sum that they had to
yeah,
acquire said business. It's sort of like, not a bad long-term bet, just in case, you know, healthcare systems start to become more interested in actually using more mainstream middle of the road wearable data in different ways, or the AI models start to, from a clinical decision support perspective, start to want to integrate that data, for example, because someone somewhere suddenly figures out more of a predictive model connecting, softer wearable data with harder clinical implications. Right? It could be a kind of a combination of those things, and the price that they got it for might very well have just made it a bit of a no-brainer for them. And they just sort of, their corporate M&A team just sort of picked it up.
we
Um,
can write it off against tax.
yeah, I mean, I don't know about that, but yeah, they maybe. I mean, the stuff where, the businesses like Febris, I know, and there are others, loads of others in the UK around remote monitoring,
Mm,
like virtual ward remote monitoring. Like Dockler obviously is like a leader in the space,
yeah,
right? Um, I don't know exactly, but I suspect that it's not like, Samsung watches, right? I think
yeah,
it's more clinical devices, pulse ox, I think blood pressure, respiratory, maybe, echocardiogram type stuff. I'm not completely certain, but I
mm,
think that that's more in line with what hospitals need. But, who knows where this stuff's going to go. I do think when you include stuff like that in a 10-year plan, it does feel a little sort of gimmicky, dare I say, a little bit like,
mm,
oh, everyone's going to have an Apple Watch and that's going to be really great. It's sort of like in the same place as you're talking about really quite hardcore genomic leaps
yeah.
forward, and really detailed elements around budgets and teams and procurement and things like that. And then there's this little bit about, oh, well, we're going to use Apple Watches and that's going to help. So, well,
Mm.
I'm not sure necessarily if that added a huge amount, but, doesn't hurt. People being more active and fitter and more aware of their health is net positive. So in that sense, I'm all for anything that supports that.
Yeah, I think that's sort of, it's an element that people can get behind, don't they? When they see this big report that's come out, the NHS 10-year plan, then the average person isn't going to sit down and read that. And when they're thinking about, well, what does this mean to me?
Mhm.
I guess for a lot of people, wearables, watches, Fitbits, whatever that might look like, is lots of people's first steps into that sort of idea of taking control of your own health and preventative health tracking and things like that. And that's obviously incredible in that it opens that up and does encourage people to create those lifestyle changes that lead to better health down the line. So I wonder if that's more of a sort of behavior change thing, which is like, we're aware that more people are doing this, so let's make sure it's captured in some form in this plan.
For sure. I don't know, because again, I haven't looked at the clinical data in this area, but I suspect somebody somewhere has done some clinical research around whether or not Fitbits at a population health level actually deliver reductions in risk measures and things like that. So like, what's the health economics on that? Are we funding people to get given wearables, right, for prevention? Because I think it's different with the virtual wards, because they've gone into a hospital setting, presumably in some way, shape or form, or they have a chronic condition that's being monitored at home, so they don't go into the hospital, so it's post-diagnosis. It's really different from saying we're going to take a population and provide them with some wearables so they live healthier lives. While very well-meaning and would be great, I'd love to see the economic modeling.
How the hell do you do that?
Yeah, and how do you do it in a way that means that that's sustainable and things like that? So I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I just while you were talking, I just was looking into the Apple Watch, because I remember there being lots of stories around kind of it going for medical device status and things like that over the past few years.
For the ECG reading, right?
Yeah, and so it's saying that its atrial fibrillation history feature has been approved by the FDA as a medical device development tool. So it's allowing it to be used in clinical trials.
Cool.
So, there is a world in which sort of these more consumer-looking wearables are used.
I have a hunch. It's a hunch that these large consumer-focused electronics businesses are slightly nervous around actually being medical device developers, because that means a completely different set of regulatory oversights, and the FDA can come kick in your door and they can audit everything anywhere, which I am not certain that that's where they want to go. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's a different pathway for those businesses. But maybe.
Yeah, it's fascinating regardless. But hopefully, time will tell if Samsung ends up developing their own things, ends up buying a whole host of other stuff.
Look, at the end of the day,
it'll be interesting.
M&A activity, more investment, more focus in digital tech and how digital technology can be used to improve health benefits everybody. So, rising tide raises all ships.
Finally today, we are looking at a piece of policy conversation for the future of healthcare in Europe. A new framework published in NPJ Digital Medicine outlines how we can scale digital health technologies in a way that is both systemic and equitable. They propose 5 key policy enablers to guide this shift. So firstly, define DHTs within fit-for-purpose policy frameworks. So that's identifying which digital technologies need dedicated support. 2, establish AI-ready regulatory frameworks and accelerated access pathways to enable sort of timely approvals for these tools. 3, adopt dynamic fit-for-purpose health technology assessments to evaluate the updates in real-world performance. Implement access and reimbursement models tailored to them, and support system readiness and clinical integration to ensure we're actually embedding these tools into day-to-day care. So the authors argue that while countries like Germany and France have made quite strong progress on this, adoption is uneven across Europe. So how do we harmonise these efforts by focusing on cross-border collaboration and get that rising tide that lifts all ships, get Europe closer to this patient-centred healthcare system that doesn't feel fragmented? So there's a long article, but hopefully you guys have some thoughts on it. I'd like to, Steve, I'll open it to you first. What do you think about this? Why do you think this is so important when it comes to sort of scaling digital health solutions?
So most digital health solutions will fall under some kind of medical device regulation. That's a generalization, but just, maybe, I don't know, what does most mean? A lot, okay? Mm-hmm. Class 1, Class 2, IVD, which is what PocDoc is, an in vitro diagnostic device. There's all kinds of things. So in Europe and the UK, we decided, who knows when, I don't, to privatize that process of regulatory approval. The authority to regulate a medical device resides with about 60 private companies called notified bodies across Europe. In the US, it's national. It's the FDA. It's one nationalized institution that does not operate for profit. So that means that the FDA can set its own priorities, it can set its own timelines, it doesn't seek to increase prices or gouge or do any of those different things. It operates for the benefit of the US healthcare system, which I understand is a bit of a loaded term, and we don't need to get into that probably here. But the major difference in Europe is that the notified bodies are incentivized to take longer because they get paid more. They get paid for every single round of questions that they come up with. They get paid based on the time that they spent evaluating your file. So there is absolutely no incentive, zero, for the European regulatory industry to speed up. It's absolutely broken. So it's already so far behind the FDA in regulation and approach to AI that it's almost embarrassing. Like, the gulf is enormous and growing bigger. And there's no way, when it takes on average 2.5 years to find it, to get a CE mark, 2.5 years in AI, is an eternity. It doesn't even make any sense. Like, there's still no really robust AI regulatory frameworks whatsoever. So I don't believe that we're not set up. The biggest single thing, if the EU wanted to, but they won't, I don't think, because they can't, because they've devolved this to member states, would be to centralize. But I just don't think it's too big a lift. And the biggest thing the UK government could do is to get notified bodies under control and get them aligned with government priorities. But that is mentioned absolutely nowhere, no how. And I suspect that is in this bucket that I talked about before of, it's just too hard to really get your head around. But yeah, I think it's a massive issue. It's an absolutely enormous issue, particularly when you consider now that you can apply directly for regulatory approval in pretty much any country in the world. So Saudi, for example, you could just apply directly. All of these places, lots and lots of places will accept direct applications. You don't have to have FDA or CE approval, let alone CA, which is a whole different kettle of fish that we had to create because of Brexit. So I think Europe and the UK is really at risk from a purely regulatory perspective of just totally missing the boat on the regulation of new technologies, regulation and adoption of new technologies. So that's which sounds kind of bleak, and it's unrelated actually to the healthcare system as a customer. It's actually more of it's market access in the purest sense.
Yeah, there is something, I remember this being on the news last year, and I think it is ticking closer this year because I've just looked it up, which is that I think Switzerland and maybe some other countries are kind of considering allowing FDA approved products into the market as well.
Makes total sense. I think Switzerland actually did that.
I think, I've just found some news around, which was last month, May, saying that they're sort of close to getting to the point where they can. But there's been a mutual recognition agreement between the FDA and the EU since 2021. And Switzerland's got its own sort of regulatory framework.
I mean, I'd like to see the details on what classes, right? Because on what classes that applies to. So, but yeah, I mean, I believe that the only way for Europe to accelerate adoption and to break through this trap is to work through some kind of equivalence.
Yeah.
Because otherwise it's going to be really, really difficult. Now, the regulators in the countries might say, actually, we quite like the slow pace because we don't want, and that's okay, but that has this downstream impact and it doesn't marry up with this wanting to adopt new technology thing. So you can't have your cake and eat it.
You can't have it both ways.
No.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we've worked with people or, talked to people that are based in Europe and going through the process of trying to get regulation in both Europe and in some cases the US simultaneously. I think they found the FDA approval sort of much easier in many ways.
It's a breath of fresh air.
You just you do what you have to do.
Well, they also guarantee timelines, response timelines.
Exactly.
It's completely transparent. You can arrange a pre-submission call or as many pre-submission calls as you want, where they are unbelievably helpful.
Yeah, loads of feedback.
Right. Whereas if you look at the CE marking process, it's a complete black box. You can't even get any timelines. They won't tell you anything. In some cases. So I think that it's very, Europe needs to shape up.
Yeah,
But that's a
definitely.
very tricky problem because you've already privatized it. The genie's out the bottle, and you've created a reverse incentive for those businesses to actually speed things up.
Yeah.
And especially a lot of those companies, they jack their prices 30% year on year
Yeah.
for no
It's
reason.
outrageous, isn't it?
Yeah, and there's nothing you can do. It's a total cartel.
And also you've got different countries working together as well. And, what if someone, is based in one country, they're undergoing CE marking, but they're also having to have conversations with lots of different healthcare systems across different countries as well. It's just
Yeah.
start thinking about that rollout. It becomes this really complex problem.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. And it doesn't seem like anyone really is thinking about it, because the most we get is like, well, we're going to bump up the role of NICE and bump up the role of the MHRA, but that's post-approval. That happens after you get approved. No one's thinking about pre-approval, about how to make that process better. How do we shorten this valley of death between development starting and regulatory approval? That valley of death is real and it's brutal, and anyone that's done it has been through that. Anyone listening will know that's very, very tough.
Yeah. Hugh, did you want to jump in with anything?
I have nothing to add on that. Heard the same from a lot of innovators. So I think a club needs to be formed.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not normally negative, but I am negative about that one thing, because I do think that is something that doesn't get enough airtime from people.
Well, thank you, Steve, for that. I think it's a long report, and I'd encourage anyone to read the paper, because it does dive into some questions, and hopefully you can come up with your own conclusions as to where Europe's headed and what's needed to encourage that innovation across the whole continent. So that's all for today, folks. Thanks, Steve, so much for joining us. Really appreciate you giving up your time on a Thursday afternoon. And thanks, Hugh and Adama, for, a great discussion and keeping us rolling in the background. To everyone that's listening, don't forget to check out the best stories of the week in Healthtech Pigeon. You can read all those reports in detail through the links there, and also tune into Biotech Dodo's newsletter if you're more of the biotech mindset. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful weekend, and bye.